know why I say my favorite places to campaign are on college campuses. When I come to the campuses and talk to the young people, I find out that the message of liberty is alive and well, and I'm very encouraged. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being enthusiastic. Because that's what I've been talking about for a long time, the message of liberty, and why our country has provided in the past a maximum amount of liberty, but right now we're under threat, and that is why it is so important for you to be galvanized and come together and struggle to renew this country and make sure our liberty is preserved, because that is what is so important in order to preserve peace and prosperity. But it is rather amazing to me how the message has spread, because 4 years ago when I ran, I didn't expect a whole lot, and yet actually it was on some college campuses that I'd come to, and the message of freedom and the message of free market economics and Austrian economics and the issue of the Federal Reserve was already on the campuses. So to me, I was delighted to hear this, because these are such important issues. But I might start off with one of the issues that's most challenging, for the Republican primary voters, because there is a mixed understanding of what a strong national defense is all about. Because the Constitution is rather clear. We should have a strong national defense. It's not a state issue. We should defend our country. We should defend our country when we're under attack. We should preserve our national security and our national sovereignty. But that does not justify us assuming the role of world policemen. We should not be we should not expect our military people, especially our guard units and our reserve units, to be nation builders, to get on and be policemen and building buildings that we had once bombed. It makes no sense. Another reason why that makes no sense is we don't have any more money to do it, and that's a good reason. One thing that seems so odd is that we've allowed our foreign policy to get out of control, and there hasn't been much resistance until recently. But 10 years in Afghanistan is enough, and it's time to get out of Afghanistan and that whole region. Not only could we save a lot of money getting out of the Middle East and that region of the world, but what about troops in Germany? They've been there since 1945. I think Germany can pay for their own national defense, and we ought to come on from Germany. We're still in Japan, and we're still in South Korea, and we're many trillions of dollars in debt, and we spend about $1.5 trillion a year on militarism, not on defense. That's one thing to try to remember. When people say, well, if you want to cut this military spending, you're against defense. No. If you cut militarism, that is a lot different than defense. Matter of fact, I think we're less safe because of the way we spend our money overseas, and we get ourselves into too much trouble. But the tradition of non-intervention overseas has been a Republican position in the past. I think many Republicans have forgotten it. But, it was Eisenhower that warned us about the military-industrial complex. Even in the year 2000, President Bush ran on a program of no nation building and don't police the world. So it shouldn't be that strange that Republicans and conservatives and libertarians should be opposed to it, especially since the more we're over there, it seems like the greater danger that we're in. And that's where the real problem comes from. And this is the reason we have to address it. The Constitution is rather clear. We can have a strong national defense, but it doesn't give us the authority to do all these things that we've done overseas. So this time will come that we will come home. The Soviets, ironically, they finally brought their system, which was vulnerable because it was communism and it was destined to fail. It was predicted by the Austrian economists that socialism doesn't work and will fail. So it eventually failed, and guess where they were? What was the last straw that broke their back? And that was they got bogged down in a war in Afghanistan. So you'd think we'd learn the lesson. Here we are, bogged down again. Not only that, but we're still in Iraq. They say we're going to be coming home. But you know, we just built an embassy. You, your family, the taxpayers of America, just built an embassy in Baghdad. And it cost over $1 billion and going to cost a lot more to maintain. The Congress, with their infinite wisdom, just authorized 17,000 employees for that embassy. I would say there'd be a lot better ways of spending that money right here at home rather than over there. The bases that we have built in Iraq and in Afghanistan and now in Pakistan, of course we're involved in Somalia and Yemen, and now we're in Libya. We're in Libya, and Congress wasn't even barely notified, let alone ask for a declaration of war or permission or the funding. The president just marches in and gets us involved in another war. And you can be assured with all the revolutions going on in the Middle East, some are probably very healthy, but we're probably very much involved in all of them. Our CIAs, every place around the world. I don't know how anybody can hardly keep tabs on them, but we are now institutionalizing this whole idea of drone warfare. We can hit any single spot in the world with a drone. Now, everybody said, well, that sounds like a pretty good idea because there's a bunch of bad guys out there and they might do us harm, so we can target this guy and kill him with a drone attack. So that's why we have to have the whole earth covered by drones. But the whole problem is sometimes these drones aren't exactly accurate. Sometimes there's a misdiagnosis. Sometimes they miss and kill innocent people. So if they're after one guy and the bomb misses it by a block and kills 20 innocent civilians, guess what? How many more enemies do we have? A lot more. So it perpetuates itself. And this is the type of warfare that we've been involved in. We have changed our attitude, I think, in a dangerous way. This current president has gotten us involved in Libya, but he's also said that assassination is a proper procedure, even of American citizens. But people say, well, that's okay because that's only after the real bad guys. But that's not the point. We're supposed to live in a land of the rule of law. So even though why you want the really bad people to get a good trial is because you want to set a precedent for all of us in case we get some bad people in our own government wanting to do harm to us. Wars are bad because it conditions the people in the particular countries to be careless about their personal liberties. There's a war going on, so therefore we have to sacrifice our liberties. That came up right after 9/11. The atmosphere was that of great fear and misunderstanding and not knowing exactly what was going on. So within weeks, guess what came to the House floor and passed rather easily? It was called the Patriot Act. Now the Patriot Act is a very good bill and law that ought to be repealed as soon as possible. The real tragedy in the aftermath of 9/11 was that the Patriot Act had been around for a while. It wasn't brand new, but they were revising it and working on it. And it was brought to the House floor. It was hundreds of pages long, and it came within an hour of being voted on. So nobody really had a time to study it. And so when we were voting on it, I was talking to another member, and he was voting for the bill. There were only a few of us that opposed it. I said, why are you voting for this? You haven't read it. You don't even know what's in it. He says, yeah, but it's called the Patriot Act. He says, how can I go home? How can I go home and explain to people when we're having this major crisis that I voted against the Patriot Act? I said, why don't you just go home and explain it to them? That would be a good idea on why you're voting against it. But the Patriot Act had been planned, and it was a good opportunity. Matter of fact, Paul O'Neill, the Secretary of the Treasury, describes his first cabinet meeting in the early years of 2001. And the very first meeting, he was dumbfounded about it because the subject was, now think about it, the beginning of 2001, in January, the first meeting, they were saying, when are we going to hit Baghdad? When are we going to invade Iraq? So the plans were being laid then. So when the crisis hit, obviously, this was an opportunity to do what they wanted to do anyway. Now, my annoyance with the whole thing, I voted, you know, for the authority to go after Al-Qaeda, which I think was right and proper. I was upset and annoyed because they really didn't pursue bin Laden at Tora Bora, and I think they could have gotten him. And they immediately got involved in nation building, and then they slipped over and got involved in Iraq. But one thing that I proposed back then to try to narrow the scope of what we're doing, instead of having war against everybody for not a precise reason, undeclared, and who knows how long it would last, and I was very concerned about that. So they brought us to the International Relations Committee, and I had them vote on a war resolution. I say, all right, let's vote on it. If you want to declare war, know who the enemy is and fight it and win it. But they, oh no, we want to just give the president the authority to do this. And so when I brought this up and made it vote for it, nobody voted for it. They explained to me that part of the Constitution, we don't worry about that anymore. We don't follow that part of the Constitution. So that tells you the attitude of the people in Washington. And that's precisely how they operate. The part that they don't like, and of course there's a part they don't understand. So the part they don't like, they just totally ignore it. So the law, the Constitution is very, very important, but following it is just as important. And if the law is good but we don't follow it, it doesn't matter much. And this is where we are today. But the effort which had been planned, they were anxious to get into Iraq, and at the time they decided to go in and invade Iraq. Because what did they tell us? What did they tell the people? They told our country that there were weapons of mass destruction there, and that Al-Qaeda was there. All turned out not to be true. So there we are. We're still there. And like I said, we have those military bases there. I really don't believe there's any intent to change it. One of the reasons I'm running for president, as president, I would get out of those places and I would leave those people alone. Ronald Reagan was the president that I knew best. He happened to have been an endorser of the gold standard. But he sent troops into Lebanon in the early 80s. I think it was 1983. And he made a statement, I'm going in there and we're going to, straighten this mess out. And he says, I would never turn tail and run. A few months later, the suicide attackers started occurring. Because suicide terrorism is a result of people that come on the land and in a country they want to send them off. So suicide terrorism immediately cropped up against the French and the Americans in Lebanon. And 242 Marines were killed, and Reagan brought the troops home. Brought all the Marines out and just stopped that. And when he wrote about this in his memoirs, he said that, he says, I remember I said I wouldn't turn tail and run, but he says, when it dawned on me about the irrationality of the politics of that region, he says he knew it didn't make any sense to stay there. I thought that was a pretty brave statement. And then he followed up and said, is if he had only followed a policy of neutrality and being neutral in that instant, he says those Marines would still be alive. Those are the kind of things that nobody hears about and reads about, but they realize that people look back and presidents do give you hints on what should be done and shouldn't be done. The Vietnam War, which I remember rather clearly because I was drafted in 1963 and I was in for 5 years, and that war was an utter disaster. We lost over 60,000 military personnel. And the real instigator of that war was Robert McNamara. So he wrote a memoir, and when he wrote his memoir was sort of explaining it, and it was an apologetic in a way, and he certainly was recanting his enthusiasm for the war. And a reporter, when he was talking about his book, the reporter asked him, he says, he says, do you think you should apologize for what you did? And he said something, what good is an apology? He says, the only thing that counts is if we look at our policies, find out what we did wrong, and change it. That is what we should do. We have an unsound foreign policy. We should look at it and change it. That's what we need to do. Our liberties here at home in the last 10 an airline. And then proper procedure, is there probable cause when the TSA agents take pictures and nude x-rays, as well as poking and prodding of little kids and elderly people, as if this was going to make us safer. They haven't caught one person in all these years by doing all that. So before 9/11, we were spending $40 billion on security and to protect ourselves, which failed, and they did discover a lot of mistakes. And but nobody got fired, and nothing ever happened. But what did we do? We doubled the amount of money. Now we spend $80 billion on providing security, but as long as we pursue this foreign policy of overseas intervention, I don't see how things are going to get much better. But this is all an economic problem too. Some people separate the militarism from economics, but it costs money. It's a major factor, so we have to consider it. If you're concerned, as I'm sure you are, about personal liberty, you have to think about the ramifications on the attack on our personal liberty. But there is another war going on that we must stop. It is a domestic war that's going on, and it is one that undermines our personal liberties and doesn't improve personal contact, and that is the war on drugs. Yeah! Some very difficult problems with drugs. Both illegal and legal drugs are very dangerous, and I've always been concerned and raised 5 children, a lot of grandchildren, and I want to influence them and teach them the danger of drugs. But I tell you what, I'm convinced the danger of the drug war is worse than the danger of the drugs right now. The assumption, and that day still might come, is that we would wake up as a country and say, this is all foolishness. It hasn't helped. Drug addiction is a disease. It's not a crime. Here we are putting people in prison. We're putting people in prison for life for not committing a violent crime, but they've been arrested 3 different times for some drug usage and involvement in the illegal drugs. But we tried it in alcohol. It's just think of the difference in our times. In 1919, when they wanted to make alcohol illegal, they amended the Constitution. That's how much respect they still had for the Constitution. But have they amended the Constitution to violate our civil liberties routinely now? No, they just go and do it and write the laws, and too often we've been too complacent. But after 10 years or so of prohibition, and found out that there was no less alcohol being drunk, there was a lot more dangerous alcohol that they were drinking. People were dying from the dangerous alcohol, and the criminals were making a lot of money, and there was a lot of killing, and the gangs that were delivering the alcohol. So today we have prohibition once again, and who's making all the money? The people who are selling the drugs. This is why we have this horrendous problem on the Texas border and Mexico, and there are drug wars going on. But that is not going to end until we decide that the proper way to deal with personal behavior is put the responsibility on the individual and the family. License to do harm to others. Alcohol is legal, it's handled by the states, but if somebody's drinking alcohol and they cause harm to another person, the penalty should be very serious and very severe. But the drug war is something that we need to address. Even if you address it in a very minor sense. Let's look at it from a viewpoint of states' rights. California have passed laws that said that you can use medicinal marijuana. And I do believe there are some diseases that will benefit from marijuana. And So we have the issue that the state writes a law and they say you can have this for such and such disease and all. But what happens at the federal level? They come in and they say, absolutely not. They override the state laws, and the federal agents come in, and it was supposed to have been lightened up a little bit with the current administration, and it has not been. So the federal people come in and arrest people and supersede all the state laws. So there's good reason why this whole principle of state rights issue and limited federal government should bring people together, both conservative for different reasons and liberals for other reasons, but stick to the principle and be consistent that problems that we have, if you have to have regulations and laws, such as dealing with alcohol, it should be done at the state level. Well, they decided in 1938 that it was a bad idea to let people make those kind of decisions for themselves. Up until that time, the federal government was out of that business. And so marijuana became illegal. But then there's another plant that sort of is in the family of marijuana, and it's called hemp. So they said, well, hemp looks like marijuana, so we have to make hemp illegal as well. So, but somebody told me once, and I didn't check this out because I wasn't going to actually test it and see if this is true. They said if you want to get high on a hemp cigarette, the cigar has to be as big as a phone pole. So it's really not quite that dangerous. But what does it do? Hemp is a good product. It's industrial. You can make clothes out of it. You can make all kinds, and it's used in nutrition. And so where do hemp products get made? Up in Canada. So Canada has the hemp business, and we buy the products back in. So maybe it would be a good suggestion that maybe a few jobs could be created if we just legalized this process. This whole notion that we have to have some federal agency and a bunch of bureaucrats and a bunch of politicians that are going to make it safe for you and know how to take care of yourself. You know, if you make a mistake for yourself, you have to and should suffer your consequences. That's the responsibility in a free society. But what happens if the politician or the bureaucrat makes the mistake and it's wrong? It's the whole country that suffers. And that is why you don't want people in Washington and at a minimum at any level. But this attitude has sort of advanced to such a degree that everything you put in your mouth is regulated by the federal government or state government. But it's contradictory because our First Amendment is pretty clear. Not too many people are challenged. There are a few coming around that want to challenge you on the freedom of choice of our religion and freedom of choice of our intellectual matters. So if we allow individuals to deal with their own personal matters on their spiritual life, that's pretty important. What about their intellectual life? We're not supposed to regulate that. But as soon as it comes to anything that puts in our body, food or drink or whatever, we think that we have to have the bureaucrats do all the regulating and telling us what to do. I reject that. We don't need that. Something else that I consider rather silly, and didn't know there were that many people interested, and maybe people in here aren't too interested, but it's a freedom issue. People came to my office and said, you know, the federal government is interfering with me being allowed to give my children raw milk. And well, why is that? Well, they think raw milk could be dangerous, and under certain circumstances may well be. But some people think it might be nutritious, and they want to do it. So the federal government is there now, drawing up the rules and regulations on who can buy and who can sell raw milk. But that's one little thing. But what else do they do? The drug companies are behind so many of these regulations that tell you about alternative health choices, nutritional products, and vitamins. Why shouldn't you be able to make up your own mind about that? If you can make up your own mind about what you're reading, about your religious beliefs, why can't you make up your own mind about what vitamins you buy? Of course, I'm sure you have probably read that soon you won't be able to buy the old-fashioned light bulbs. You're going to have to buy those new light bulbs. Now, the new light bulbs might be pretty pretty good, there might be a reason for it, and maybe there are some arguments for it. But why don't we have the choice? Why does the federal government have to tell us what kind of light bulbs we're going to buy? Because not only does it deal with how we treat other people around the world, or how our government protects our liberties here at home in a personal matter, but also in the very important issue of the economy. And that is the big issue today. For the presidential candidates, inevitably we're always asked, what are you going to do about jobs? What's going on with the economy? And that is very important. It's on the minds of everybody, because jobs aren't easily come by these days. You can get out of college and have a degree, and it's not like it used to be. It's going to be tough. But the one thing is so often they ask the question, they say, what are you going to do the first day, first week? How are you going to create jobs? If government creates a job, it's usually a bureaucrat, and we don't need any more bureaucrats. We don't need any more. So the government really doesn't create jobs, but the government has a responsibility to protect the environment where people can create jobs, and that means a free market economy. It also means a sound currency. Is based on the most basic principle is private property, the right to own property and trade property and contract and property negotiations. And we should have legalized contracts, we should have enforcement of contracts, we should have private property, we should have sound money, and we should have essentially minimal federal regulations. And of course, it would really help all of us if we had minimal taxes, like start off with getting rid of the income tax. A lot of people say to correct our problems, what we have to do is sacrifice a lot. But if we return your liberty to you, and you can run your own life, and you're energetic enough, and you can earn some money, and you get to keep it, I don't know whether that's so much of a sacrifice. I think that's a pretty good deal. We didn't have an income tax at the beginning, and that was something new. It came in at the beginning of the last century, as did this new monetary system that they think is so wonderful, this paper money system, this thing called the Federal Reserve. So that is the reason I imagine you could probably guess my position on the Federal Reserve. We're going to get rid of the Federal Reserve. And when you buy and sell, you have the monetary unit, which is supposed to measure the value of the goods and services you're buying and selling. So the money is one half of every transaction. Over the many decades, if not thousands of years, governments, when they abuse the currency, they resort to price controls and even wage controls. And we had them several times in my lifetime: World War II, Korea War in the 1970s. And they're absolutely disastrous. And most economists, right and left, are not advocating price controls. But nobody really asked the question, if one half of every single transaction is your money, why do we allow the Federal Reserve to have monopoly control of that particular unit on the supply that we have and the interest that we pay on it? And then they wonder how they get the economy all messed up. Well, they get it messed up because it's a gross distortion. Prices, if you don't have a pricing structure, you don't have a market. When you have total wage and price controls, you get socialism. And it just destroys the economy. This is why Mises, the great Austrian economist, said that socialism won't work. There's no pricing structure, and you can't get a supply and demand. You can't get the right information. So he predicted it wouldn't work, and it doesn't work. But he also predicted that if you have an interventionist type of economy, like a Keynesian economy like we have now, and then you have the manipulation of money and credit, it will lead to a socialistic type of economy. But because we distort the price of money, the interest rates, and interest rates are lower than they should be, individuals change their habits. Savings habits change. We save less money. But we still needed capital. They thought capital came out of a printing press. Capital in a free market comes out of savings. So they turned that around and they said, well, if there are no savings, interest rates go up. And that's a signal. That's not the time to build more houses. But what if there's no savings and interest rates go down? Well, that's a sign that you have to build more houses, even if there are too many houses. That's the source of the bubble, whether it's the NASDAQ bubble, the housing bubble, or the bond bubble that we're in right now. It's all distorted by interfering with prices that you need to know about in order to make good decisions. So the bubbles are the problem, and when you think about what we have to do to change the economy, you have to think about how we got here. What caused the bubble? Because it's the bursting of the bubble that causes the recession. And the most important thing you can do to reverse this interventionist planned economy that we have to a freer market is you've got to get rid of all the mistakes. There's too many mistakes. We had this debt pyramid building for 30 or 40 years. There was way too much debt. And then there was all this speculative debt in with the derivatives market. And this has been a great burden. Politically, before the 1930s, it was permissible to allow people to go bankrupt. And it was wiped off the books and people went back to work after a year or so. You could prevent it by, of course, not having a central bank. But anyway, if you have distortion, you want to eliminate the mistakes. You want the correction to come. But during the Depression, it was then changed. Our economy changed to the Keynesian economics. And both Republicans and Democrats argued the case that you have to do something, and the people want you to do something. So Japan did it, and look where they are, 20 years, and we did it in the Depression. We're doing it again, and they say this depression has been going on, for the last 4 or 5 years. But the truth is, this country has been getting poorer and poorer since the year 2000, since the NASDAQ bubble. The good jobs, there have been no real good jobs produced in this country in the last 10 years. Jobs are going overseas. The only thing we're exporting is our money. And because they still take our money, we're still living off that. But it means that we have debt, and that will come to an end. The world is recognizing this. You cannot build not only our bubble here, but the whole world is based on this dollar bubble because they're still taking these dollars and thinking that we can save the whole world. Right now, the plans are being laid that we're going to bail out Europe and bail out Greece and everybody else. But eventually the burden comes back to the American taxpayer. So when the crisis hit and they said it's going to be a catastrophe if we don't bail out the banks, everybody ran up there and it was easily passed, the stimulus packages and the Fed actually spent a lot more money than the Congress did. I mean, that's how powerful they are. And they got involved with manipulating $15 trillion worth of credit. A third of it went to the foreign banks. I mean, that's how much out of control it is. That's why we have to get a hold of this. But the great danger is that we're not going to do the right thing soon enough. And what will happen is this economy worldwide is going to continue to deteriorate, and then we're going to see more of what we see in the streets, whether it's in London or whether it's in Greece or Spain or whatever, and it quite possibly can come here. Because, back to the basic assumption about what rights are. Rights come to us as individuals from a creator in a natural way, our right to our life and our liberty, and the right to keep what we earn. And yet, we as a country have been willing to distort this whole definition of rights. We've allowed people to redefine it, and it's called entitlements. If I'm entitled to something for free, then I have a right to it. And we have a lot of people in this country, when they don't get what they think they're entitled to and have a right to, they become very angry. And this is what's happening. Even those who have been on the receiving end right now are getting pretty scared because they know there is a big problem. But the people who are obligated to do the work and take care of the other half, they're getting pretty nervous too. And the pie is shrinking, the demands are growing. We need a new system of economic policy. Absolutely. Reinvention. It means that we have to take what we know. It's a rather new idea about free markets and freedom, because the best test of that experiment was in this country. It was only a couple hundred years. In the last 100 years, we've been undermining it. So most of the world and most of the history have been operated by tyrants and kings and pharaohs and dictators. and not true emphasis on liberty. And I see the problem as one of our lost understanding and our lost confidence in liberty and free markets, because people are frightened, well, if the government doesn't take care of me, who's going to take care of me? And we're entitled to this. So those attitudes have to change. But even on the monetary system, when people say, oh, that Ron Paul, he wants to do is go back to the gold standard, I say, no, just a minute. I do believe that we should have commodity money. I do believe we ought to obey the Constitution. But we don't have to go back because it was not a perfect standard. But I'll tell you one thing, what we have to reject is this whole notion that 12 individuals in a secret room can get together and decide how many billions of dollars are in people's debt. Experiment, and now we're suffering the consequences because we haven't stayed loyal to that. But where I'm encouraged is when I come to the campuses, because there are so many young people and a lot of others who are now looking at this and saying, yes, we need to do something. People are now studying free market economics. They are now willing to study and say, individualism and self-reliance is a good idea. And they're also coming around to another issue that I've talked about for a long time, I think it's very important, is that we have to take the concept of liberty and put it back into one piece. Because about 100 years ago, we sort of divided it into pieces. We had one group over here and say, economic liberty is very important. We have to have free enterprise and profits. But on your personal liberty, on what you're going to do with your life, we have to regulate you because we don't want you to harm yourself. Then the other people say, oh no, people have their personal liberties. We can't tell them what to do with their own lives. But we have to regulate the economy because the economy is unfair. It's all one unit. Freedom is economic liberty and personal liberty. Understand it and just shift our government away from this authoritarian approach. It might be tough for a year, but that's about all. But if we don't, we're going to continue to have a tough year after tough year after tough year, and it's only the understanding that really counts. The country, the government that we have is a reflection of a prevailing attitude. The prevailing attitude in this country has been absorbed by intervention in the economy, interference in our personal life, and intervention overseas and telling other people how to live. So this whole idea of saying that government should be non-interventionist, that we should mind our own business, not only overseas, we should mind our own business, the government, about what you do with your personal life, and we should mind our own business and protect the marketplace, but not to pretend that we can have perfect distribution of wealth. That is unachievable. In a free society, people should be allowed to choose. That we get challenged as those who express themselves on free markets and personal liberty is that we're uncaring because you don't talk about the safety net, what's going to happen to people. But I've come to the conviction, and I believe this strongly, that if you do care about your fellow man, if you do care about the maximum prosperity and the best distribution and the best chances for peace and prosperity, you have to believe in liberty. That's how you get prosperity. Say no, it's not good enough because there will always be some poor people and we won't be able to take care of them, so we give up on the whole principle. I argue that, if you say that in a free society if you have 1 or 2% that need some help, and you say, well, we have to introduce this notion to take care of that 2% through force by extracting and moving funds around, you give up 100% of the principle. And before you know it, 2% is 4%, 6%, 10%, and this is where we are today because it started gradually and to the point where the more welfare redistribution you have, the more undermining of personal liberty, the more undermining of the productive capacity of the country. So that is where we are today. The other reason why I get excited about talking about what a free society is all about about is it brings people together with different attitudes. We generally understand this in a religious sense. In a true sense of the word, America has been pretty tolerant. We have different religions. Lately, I think there's been less tolerance, but we traditionally have been pretty tolerant. And even those who are non-believers, we're tolerant of them as well. But we should also see that in a free society, we have to be tolerant in all ways. If people want to run their personal lives in certain ways, there's a lot of people that I argue for their liberty, and they might be doing some things that I don't want any part of, and I might advise them to do differently. But I don't have, from my viewpoint, I don't have the authority, nor should I have the authority, that I am going to use force to change their habits. Those who disagree with what I'm saying they say America is an exceptional nation. We are wonderful good, and we know what is right, and we have democracy, and we have to spread our goodness. This is the theme of the neoconservatives. We have to spread our goodness with force, so we'll go over there and kill a lot of people, telling them how they should live. It's a system that is doomed to fail. But I believe in traditional American exceptionalism. I believe we have been an exceptional country. And I do believe we could be exceptional if we believe in liberty and set an example. So if we want to spread our message, we should apply these principles here at home, become the freest and the safest and the most prosperous country in the world. Then, when the example is set, others will emulate us. Though I'm very concerned and worry about what's going to happen in the near future, actually I'm pretty optimistic. And once again, it's because I've talked to the younger generations, the younger generation around the country, and many others, and they're very receptive to these ideas. Ideas do have consequences. I believe the ideas of liberty are spreading. That is the goal that I have, not only to spread it in this campaign, but if it be that I am your president, that will be my goal, is to spread the cause of liberty and make sure that we are the freest and the safest and the most prosperous